Chapter 11. We count the weeks, no more. It was winter when I came up, and when the shells exploded, the frozen clods of earth were just as dangerous as the fragments. Now the trees are green again. Our life alternates between billets in the front. We have almost grown accustomed to it. War is the cause of death, like cancer and tuberculosis, like influenza and dysentery. The deaths are merely more frequent, more varied, and terrible. Our thoughts are clay. They are molded with the changes of the days. When we are resting, they are good. Under fire, they are dead. Fields of craters within and without. Everyone is so, not only ourselves here. The things that existed before are no longer valid, and one practically knows them no more. Distinctions, breeding, education are changed, are almost blotted out, and hardly recognizable any longer. Sometimes they give an advantage for profiting by a situation, but they also bring consequences along with them, in that they arouse prejudices which have to be overcome. It is as though formerly we were coins of different provinces, and now we are melted down and all bear the same stamp. To rediscover the old distinctions, the metal itself must be tested. First, we are soldiers, and afterwards, in a strange and shamefaced fashion, individual men as well. It is a great brotherhood which adds something of the good fellowship of the folk song, of the feeling of solidarity of convicts, and of the desperate loyalty to one another of men condemned to death, to a condition of life arising out of the midst of anger, out of the tension and forlornness of death, seeking in a wholly unpathetic way a fleeting enjoyment of the hours as they come. If one wants to appraise it, it is at once heroic and banal, but who wants to do that? It is this, for example, that makes Tieden spoon down his ham and pea soup in such a tearing haste when an enemy attack is reported, simply because he cannot be sure that in an hour's time he will be alive. We have discussed it at length, whether it is right or not to do so. Cat condemns it because, he says, a man has to reckon with the possibility of an abdominal wound, and that is more dangerous on a full stomach than on an empty one. Such things are real problems. They are serious matters to us, but they cannot be otherwise. Here, on the borders of death, life follows an amazingly simple course. It is limited to what is most necessary. All else lies buried in a gloomy sleep, in that besides our primitiveness and our survival, were we more subtly differentiated, we must long since have gone mad, have deserted, or have fallen. As in a polar expedition, every expression of life must serve only the preservation of existence, and is absolutely focused on that. All else is banished because it would consume energies unnecessarily. That is the only way to save ourselves. In the quiet hours, when the puzzling reflection of former days, like a blurred mirror, projects beyond me the figure of my present existence, I often sit over against myself as before a stranger, and wonder how the unnameable active principle that calls itself to life has adapted itself even to this form. All others expressions lie in a winter sleep. Life is simply one continual watch against the menace of death. It has transformed us into unthinking animals in order to give us the weapon of instinct. It has reinforced us with dullness so that we do not go to pieces before the horror, which would overwhelm us if we had clear, conscious thought. It has awakened in us a sense of comradeship, so that we escape the abyss of solitude. It has lent us the indifference of wild creatures, so that in spite of all, we perceive the positive in every moment and store it up as a reserve against the onslaught of nothingness. Thus we live a closed, hard existence of the utmost superficiality, and rarely does an incident strike out a spark. But then, unexpectedly, a flame of grievous and terrible yearnings flares up. Those are the dangerous moments. They show us that the adjustment is only artificial, that it is not simple rest, but the sharpest struggle for rest. In the outward form of our life, we are hardly distinguishable from bushmen, but whereas the latter can be so always because they are so truly and at best may develop further by exertion of their spiritual forces, with us it is the reverse. Our inner forces are not exerted toward regeneration, but towards degeneration. The Bushmen are primitive and naturally so, but we are primitive in an artificial sense, by virtue of the utmost effort. And at night, waking out of a dream, overwhelmed and bewitching by the crowding apparitions, a man perceives with alarm how slight is the support, how thin the boundary that divides him from the darkness. We are little flames poorly sheltered by frail walls against the storm of disillusion and madness, in which we flicker and sometimes almost go out. Then the muffled roar of the battle becomes a ring that encircles us. We creep in upon ourselves and with big eyes stare into the night. Our only comfort is the steady breathing of our comrades asleep, and thus we wait for the morning. Every day, every hour, every shell, and every death cuts into this thin support, and the years wasted rapidly. I see how it is already gradually breaking down around me. There's the mad story of Dietering. He was one of those who kept himself to himself. His misfortune was that he saw a cherry tree in a garden. We were just coming back from the front line, and at a turning of the road near our billets, marvelous in the morning twilight, stood this cherry tree before us. It had no leaves, but was one white mass of blossom. In the evening, Dietering was not to be seen. Then at last he came back and had a couple of branches of cherry blossom in his hand. We were making we made fun of him and asked whether he was going to a wedding. He made no answer, but lay down on his bed. During the night, I heard him making a noise. He seemed to be packing. I sensed something amiss and went over to him. He made out that it was nothing, and I said to him, "Don't do anything silly, Dietering." "Ah, why? It's merely that I can't sleep." "What did you pick the cherry branches for?" "Surely I can pick cherry blossom if I want to," he replied evasively, and after a while, "I have a big orchard with cherry trees at home. When they are in blossom, from the hayloft, they look like one single sheet, so white. It is just the time. Perhaps you will get leave soon. You may even be sent back as a farmer." He nodded, but he was far away. When these peasants are excited, they have a curious expression, a mixture of cow and yearning God, half stupid, half rapt. In order to turn him away from his thoughts, I asked him for a piece of bread. He gave it to me without a murmur. That was suspicious, for he is usually tight-fisted. So I stayed awake. Nothing happened. In the morning, he was as usual. Apparently, he had noticed that I had been watching him, but the second morning he was gone. I noticed it, but said nothing, in order to give him time. He might perhaps get through. Various fellows have already got into Holland. But at roll call, he was missed. A week after, we heard that he had been caught by the field gendarmes, those despicable military police. He had headed towards Germany. That was hopeless, of course, and of course he did everything else just as idiotically. Anyone might have known that his flight was only homesickness and a momentary aberration. But what does a court martial 100 miles beyond the front line know about it? We've heard nothing more of Dietering. But sometimes it broke out in other ways, this danger, these pent-up things, as from an overheated boiler. It will be enough to tell how Berger met his end. Our trenches have now for some time been shot to pieces, and we have an elastic line, so that there is practically no longer any proper trench warfare. When attack and counterattack have waged backwards and forwards, there remains a broken line and a bitter struggle from crater to crater. The front line has been penetrated, and everywhere small groups have established themselves. The fight is carried on from clusters of shell holes. We are in a crater. The English are coming down obliquely. They are turning our flank and working in behind us. We are surrounded. It is not easy to surrender. Fog and smoke hang over us. No one would recognize that we wanted to give ourselves up, and perhaps we don't want to. A man doesn't even know himself at such moments. We hear the explosions of hand grenades coming towards us. Our machine gun sweeps over the semicircle in front of us. The cooling water evaporates. We hastily pass around the case. Every man pisses in it, and thus we again have water and are able to continue firing. But behind us, the attack crashes ever nearer. A few minutes, and we are lost. Then, at closest range, a second machine gun bursts out. It is set up in a crater alongside us. Berger has fetched it, and now the counterattack comes over from behind. We are set free and make contact with the rear. Afterwards, as we lie in comparatively good cover, one of the food carriers reports that a couple 100 yards distant there lies a wounded messenger dog. "Where?" asks Berger. The other describes the place to him. Berger goes off either to fetch the beast in or to shoot it. 6 months ago, he would not have cared. He would have been reasonable. We try to prevent him. Then, as he goes off grimly, all we can say is, "You're mad," and let him go. For these cases of frontline madness become dangerous if one is not able to fling the man to the ground and hold him fast. And Berger is 6 feet and the most powerful man in the company. He's absolutely mad, for he has to pass through the barrage. But this lightning that lowers somewhere above us has struck him and made him demented. It affects others so that they begin to rave, to run away. There was one man who even tried to dig himself into the ground with his hands, feet, and teeth. It is true such things are often simulated, but the pretense itself is a symptom. Berger, who means to finish off the dog, is carried away with a wound in the pelvis, and one of the fellows who carry him gets a bullet in the leg while doing